Hello everyone and welcome to the final list video, and in this one we're finally gonna talk about my 50 favorite albums of 2023. 2023 was a pretty interesting year when it comes to music, and I found some really cool stuff that I want to show to you and recommend to you. Just with the previous list videos, this is obviously just my opinion. Unlike the 50 songs list, I'm not going to restrict it to one album per artist. However, this list is not going to include archivals, compilations, or live recordings. And with all that being said, let's jump straight into this list because we've got a lot to talk about. So at number 50 we start with a new album of Thehe Card, No Highs. I personally was somewhat disappointed with some of the recent outputs of Thehe Card. They took a few risks with their sound, but they didn't really do it for me. On the other hand, No Highs seems like it goes back to the roots of some of the more interesting directions of Thehe Card's music over the years. This is a quite compelling ambient album with beautiful and atmospheric minimal electroacoustic pieces. I'm not head over heels over it, but for what it is, it gets the job done. At number 49 is the new album of Tong's The Cessation of Suffering. I personally haven't really been that much into the latest Tongue stuff. Now this album also goes into the newer era of black noise with more industrial instrumentation and a lot of distortion, a sound that I generally dig, but in most of the releases it's kind of a mixed bag. And this album is also a mixed bag, but at least the highlights over here are some of the most creative and most menacing stuff I've heard from Tongues in recent memory. Dynamic, noisy and disturbing, highlighting Maurice's strongest capabilities. Number 48 we have the new Armed album Perfect Saviors, an even bigger departure from what the band was previously known for. We saw quite a shift with the previous album Ultra Pop, but while Perfect Saviors keeps the noisy sounds and the technical parts, this is their closest to a kinda like indie rock and alternative dance sound. It's still not that easy to digest, but at least I'd say this is their most consistent and least messy work so far, even if it's not my personal favorite. It's still though a very interesting and engaging listen, to say the least. At number 47, Thehe Card returned after almost 8 years with their new album, Black Medium Current. Prior to this, I wasn't really aware of Thehe Card. The group was mostly known for their industrial black metal works, but we get a shift into a more progressive and avant-garde black metal style on this one, with piano tracks, vintage electronics, and gorgeous atmospheric synths. Although the album overstays its welcome in my opinion with its 70-minute runtime, the highlights are spectacular, with multiple transitions, some insane technical parts, and overall a beautiful sounding album, making this one of the most eclectic metal projects I can think of all year. At number 46, moving on with a more standard black metal release, we have Memento Mori by Marduk. Marduk returned with what is actually a solid black metal project. I wasn't really expecting much out of it since I was somewhat disappointed with their previous release Victoria a few years ago. However, Memento Mori is a nice return back to their roots, containing some of the greatest aspects of Marduk's sound. It's raw and ferocious, the drumming once again is insane, and with a few great ideas like Charlatan and Year of the Maggot. While it's your average black metal album and it's not really going to be considered one of the best Marduk works, it's still quite notable and gets the job well done as a relentless black metal album, one of my favorites from this year. Number 45 is the new album of Kario, Super Key Generator. Kario is a Japanese speedcore and J-core producer blending many other genres of electronic and dance music. And surprisingly enough, this might be the most varied, the most dense and the most chaotic album he's put out so far. It's so chaotic in fact that it's kinda hard to pick a favorite or have an entire song stand out because there are so many things happening in a span of like 2 or 3 minutes. It's insane. However, this doesn't stop this from being one of the most impressive electronic releases of the year, especially in terms of production and technicality. It's non-stop energy and adrenaline, overwhelming, intense, and it sounds really good. At number 44 we have the new album of the Heist Collective, We're Still Here. This album blew up in terms of grindcore and power balance, and it's quite understandable. It's one of the better things the genre had to offer this year. Though considering the sheer amount of great names being part of the album, you'd expect something even greater, since many of the artists don't offer much in such short tracks. But it's still rare for me to return to an album of this style and be fascinated by a portion of its ideas, let aside the strong lyrical content of queer empowerment. So at the end of the day, it's a job well done. Number 43 is The Loveliest Time by Kly Ray Jepson. Lots of bops on this one, definitely an improvement from her previous album, and some of her catchiest dance pop tracks are contained over here. The instrumentals are actually quite dense with disco and R&B elements, some quite interesting beats and infectious choruses. This marks as one of the most notable works of Kly Ray Jepson thus far, a really solid pop album overall. At number 42 we have the self-titled debut of Javana. This is the new project from one half of Cellophane. It's basically very similar to what Cellophane have been putting out the past couple years, with only very few change-ups, such as a more synth-pop approach and exclusively Greek lyrics. The album still does a great job on evoking a moody tone, with minimal synths, great sound choices, and intriguing vocal deliveries. If you enjoy recent Cellophane projects, you'll be on board with this one. At number 41 is the brand new massive album from Submerged Fury. In 1 hour and 37 minutes of material, we go from some of the most ferocious darkstep and post-industrial bangers you listen to all year to minimal dark ambient. The way the album progresses from one direction to another is pretty good, as towards the middle you do get tracks that balance both directions. However, certain tracks do overstay their welcome in my opinion. The album did not need to be this long. Certain moments are kinda repetitive, and the second half, while a welcome change, drags this whole thing down a little bit. But for the most part, this album is quite imaginative with solid production, a strong recommendation for a release you probably haven't heard of. Number 40, there's no way I wouldn't listen to a new Merzbow album with cats on the album cover. If you are unaware of Merzbow, he's one of the most legendary Japanese noise producers, and Catalysis over here contains new material that make for a more dense and engaging album than expected. For the most part you do get the standard Merzbow formula, however there are some standouts with a sonic variety on this one, from mechanical elements to beat crusher effects, avant-garde industrial passages, melodic looped sections, and a blend of both atmospheric and intense parts. So in terms of new Merzbow releases, this is one of the better ones I recommend you to check out. Keeping up with the Japanese harsh noise releases, at number 39 is Kurumi Kadoya's Sorgaratarata, a short 33-minute album that you might haven't heard of, but this was one of my most intriguing discoveries this year. Every single one of the tracks has its own unique direction, from industrial to field recordings to a 7.5-minute avant-garde distorted piano piece. It can be intense and quite bizarre at times. The more raw production does not always work in its favor, but her output makes for a very special and loud harshness release for 2023 that fans of the genre should keep an eye on. At number 38 is one of the most experimental albums I've stumbled upon this year, This Body, This Life by Joseph Doolin. Originally discovered him from a collaboration with Keiji Haino, Joseph Dolin's new output is a combination of experimental and modern classical music with bizarre piano parts, glitch, minimal beats, manipulated vocals, and field recordings. It might feel a bit overwhelming, but it's actually a quite cohesive album. Some ideas are more intriguing than others, the pacing is what's mostly all over the place, but if you're looking for a wacky and out there release that's also quite relaxing, there's a lot to unpack with This Body, This Life. Moving into some metal stuff, at number 37 is Anthron by Oldhar. The first out of the two-part album that came out this year is an exciting, aggressive and technical death metal album, with great production, solid performances, very good song structure and a couple of cool black metal type riffs. In any way does it reinvent the wheel or anything, but its ruthlessness and dissonant and somewhat psychedelic atmosphere make this such an enjoyable listening experience every time, one of my personal favorites out of metal releases from this year. At number 36, the Chemical Brothers follow up nicely No Geography, one of my personal favorite Chemical Brothers albums with an even more house-centered direction on For That Beautiful Feeling. Outside of Live Again, one of the best Chemical Brothers songs ever made, the album has a few other notable highlights and nice transitions from one point to the next, making some of the themes feel interconnected. Not a lot to add about this release. If you enjoy the catchiness and energy of No Geography, there's a lot to appreciate about the more ethereal and psychedelic approach of this new album. Number 35 is gonna be the new Utsu-P album, Happy Pills. Utsu-P is a Japanese metalcore and alternative metal artist that uses generated vocals mostly from the Vocaloid Hatsune Miku. Very interesting concept, and the results sound much better than you might expect. It's more of the same when it comes to the formula, but this might be the best the Vocaloid generated vocals sound so far. The production is impeccable, and there are so many energetic and incredibly catchy cuts. Some of my favorite Utsu-P songs are contained over here. Only main issue is that it does overstay its welcome with 21 songs in almost an hour of material. At least there are quite a few notable highlights that make the whole experience worth it. At number 34 is the new album of Godi Bliss in the midst of uncertain tides. After the thrilling EP Currents, I was really looking forward to a direction similar to this. And we basically got that with this new project, a very short album with compassionate and melancholic sounds of progressive trance and future garage, with catchy beats but tied to moody ethereal atmospheres that make it a somewhat emotional listen, a personal release from them that might not have the highs of Currents, but it still feels powerful and impactful. At number 33, Skrillex finally made a good full-length album. Not Don't Get Too Close, we don't talk about that. I'm talking about Quest for Fire, his most mature and most well put together work so far. Abandoning the sound of brostep that made him popular, Skrillex experiments with many different directions of electronic and dance music. From house to EDM to grime to UK garage, this album is quite overwhelming, and while it's really inconsistent, at least the highlights are some of the best stuff we've heard from Skrillex, with tracks like Leave Me Like This, Tears, Xena and Still Here. Immaculate production, very solid use of features, and an apparent artistic progress. Looking forward to more stuff like this in the future, and not the uninspiring commercial sound of Don't Get Too Close. Still baffling that these two came out the same period of time, but I mean, whatever. Number 32 is Resistance and the Blessing by Worlds and Girlfriend. Definitely one of the most challenging listening experiences out of the year for me, not only because we're talking about a massive album, it's 35 songs and almost 2.5 hours long, but also, wow, this album can be pretty insane. There's a lot to unpack with this project. It's extremely varied, combining modern classical with electronic, post-rock, there's a lot of glitch and spoken word, and that only touches the surface. It's a very complex album with a lot of wacky experimental moments that technically are quite impressive. Not everything works though, certain parts might feel pretentious or like just a bunch of random ideas being thrown together with no rhyme or reason, but at its best, this is definitely one of the most exceptional and most intriguing experiences I've had with an album all year. It's definitely not for everyone, but it was weirdly rewarding sitting through all of this. Number 31, we have the new Bluetooth Snort album, Disharmonium Nahab. The French avant-garde black metal group returns with their second chapter of Disharmonium, a new era of Bluetooth Snort with Lovecraftian horror aesthetics that they pull off tremendously with their haunting atmospheric riffs and just the overall sheer intensity that made the first Disharmonium of the previous year my favorite black metal release of 2022. This album is more of the same, with not as strong ideas in my opinion, and the Hideous Dream Opus interludes being kinda forgettable, but there are still some solid performances over here, great structures, and keeps the vibe that has made their latest works so special. At number 30 we have the debut album of Asniko, Weed Killer. After a series of EPs and singles that I loved, the debut mixtape Demi-Devil kinda disappointed me, but the new direction of the full-length album seems quite promising. Most of the teaser tracks were quite exciting, and I say most because let's not talk about Possession of a Weapon. But even if the deep cuts are not as strong as the singles, the darker and more sinister approach with the music, with blends of trap, pop, rap and trap metal, was intriguing and a bit refreshing with their sound. The edgy lyricism exists once again, and it's not something to write home about, but at least the highlights are some of the most addictive tracks I've heard in 2023. At number 29 is the debut album of Debbie Friday, Good Luck. This is one of those releases that I discovered out of nowhere, and I'm glad I gave it a shot. It's a very cool electro-industrial release with elements of hip-hop and a couple of tracks that sound closer to darkwave, all of this packed up in a short and sweet 33-minute album. Slightly inconsistent with its moods, but the more dark, mechanical and aggressive elements of the album, alongside with their deliveries, make for quite a few standout moments. Number 28, you all knew this was coming, its current value with Beneath the Sonics. I'm a huge fan of Current Value, and his recent works are some of the most outstanding neurofunk you can find out there. Now at the beginning, this was feeling like it was going to be my least favorite Current Value release. The first songs felt like they were going for the more experimental directions of the previous album Platinum Scatter, but without being that much interesting. And while the album shifts to a more usual neurofunk sound, after the track Mindprint it becomes great. And I'd say that this album contains some of the best Current Value songs of the decade, like BLDC, Monster and Window of Opportunity. Once again, the production is immaculate, the sounds are mind-blowing, and Current Value keeps being the greatest drum and bass producer out there. Number 27 is Incapacitance with Oxenman's Uneasiness, a very interesting approach on noise music from one of the most legendary Japanese groups, making what is arguably one of my favorite works from them, especially in terms of more recent material. It's a very interesting blend of mechanical industrial chaos with minimal drone passages and quite weird textures. Each one of the 4 lengthy tracks has its own unique characteristics, and the overall result is quite intriguing to say the least. At number 26, it's Violet Gold with Multiverse, strong return to form with what is probably my second favorite work with what I've heard from them so far. Very beautiful Black Gaze album combined with a few witch house parts and Azerbaijani music. Nothing particularly exceptional about it, but the riffs and the synths evoke some really solid emotions over here, with an album filled to the brim with beauty and darkness. Getting halfway towards the list at number 25 we got Chaos State by Linecraft, another strong output by this Japanese death industrial and power electronics producer, keeping this disturbing and dark undertone that has made past releases of his so special. Another work that specializes on monotone dark ambience and drone, chaotic use of sampling and alienating vocals. This is a strong recommendation for death industrial releases of 2023. Number 24 is a release that deserves more attention in my opinion. This is Ponomarevo Brazina Massacre with Oral Corrosion. The first track with Alex Boyce is an incredible industrial electronic song with lots of switch-ups, varied layers of sounds and superb pacing for such a long song. This side with Merzbow unfortunately drags this album down a little bit as it's kinda underwhelming, but still many great aspects to make this land this high onto the list. Number 23 is Volume 1 by d.silvestre. This is 27 minutes filled with distortion. It's such a loud album, it's unhinged. Recently we see the rise of weird underground Brazilian funk, with Pittsburgh's area over here being a subgenre that goes things to the extreme and the volume at max. d.silvestre is one of the best when it comes to this style of Brazilian funk, and this album, while a bit repetitive, is quite an experience, with some solid, intense bangers. Like, I don't even know how you come up with this. Brazil is on another level. At number 22, Austere returned after more than a decade with their new album Corrosion of Hearts, and it's great. Very solid, atmospheric and depressive black metal album, keeping the elements that were part of the appeal from their previous works. Sullen is an outstanding introduction, and the rest of the album keeps on with some really cool stuff. Definitely one of the most standout metal releases of the year for me. At number 21, Lil Yachty makes one of the most surprising releases of the year with Let's Start Here. Famous American rapper decides to create alongside with multiple other musicians a full-on neo-psychedelia and psychedelic rock album with soul and pop, and it's his most well-received work so far, and for a good reason. His vocals and deliveries work surprisingly well for the most part, the instrumentation is beautiful, and yeah, overall this is an outstanding progress. I don't know if you're gonna see more like this in the future, but at the moment this is my favorite work from Lil Yachty and a well put together psychedelic rock album in general. Number 20, DeathNite keeps on making some of the best sounding noise releases in recent memory, and that's certainly the case with Tone Simulation as well. Sonically, this album is just downright impressive, heavily detailed with tons of layers and a nice blend of both intense and more atmospheric moments. Even if the second half might not be as strong, this is definitely one of the best noise and industrial albums I can recommend from 2023. At number 19 is Katie Gately with her third album, Fons/Brute, which I might say is probably my favorite work she's put out so far. A very nice art pop release with more of a heavy emphasis on post-industrial and glitch pop, making this quite a refreshing and intriguing release of this year that in my opinion is quite underrated and deserves more recognition. A nice progress from her previous albums that were quite different in sound, and yep, quite an eclectic and engaging album over here. At number 18 we have Slater, who slays in her sophomore album, Starfucker. After experimenting with multiple directions of pop and electronic music, this is her most cohesive work so far, embracing dance pop and electropop in an astonishing way, with her vulgar, sensual, playful and hedonistic attitude being complemented really nicely in this collection of bangers that have a cool 80s disco and synth pop aesthetic. Some of the more laid-back moments might not be as striking, but this is certainly the most consistent and most well put together effort of Slater so far. At number 17 is Jessie Ware with That Feels Good. Saying that her previous album was Your Pleasure was breathtaking would be an understatement, as it's easily going to be a strong contender for one of my favorite albums of the decade. So obviously That Feels Good was one of my most anticipated releases of 2023. While it's not really as astonishing or captivating, it still has its strong moments. Insanely groovy, funky and passionate, this release crowns her once again as the new queen of disco, with stellar production and performances that is impossible not to hook you in. At number 16, Grausame Tochter, the German kinky/fetish electro-class group returns with an album that, unsurprisingly, is called BDSM for Satisfaction. If you have heard any of their works, you know what you're going to get. It's more of the same, and yet it manages to be one of their best works in my opinion. The nasty hedonistic attitude, the multiple and very intriguing vocal effects, all of those elements are still here, and the variety is still impressive, from industrial EBM to dark cabaret, and even glimpses of metal and gabber towards the end. And even after so many years, they ended up having some of their best ideas they've ever put out. Another solid vulgar work from a project that deserves more attention in my opinion. At number 15 we have Bruant with Kain and Double SM. Bruant has made a name for himself as one of the greats in power electronics, and when it comes to some more harsh and intense stuff, this album right here is a must. A punishing 72-minute album with relentless noise, feedback, solid sounds overall, and two great moments featuring vocals from FFH. If you're into the more aggressive side of Bruant's music, this album contains some of the best stuff he's done in this style. At number 14 is Black to Come with the album At Zenith Parallel Heavens. Mark Richter's new output is the greatest work out of everything I've heard from him so far. An exceptional electroacoustic album that feels similar with previous releases, but the dark ambience, the monotone drone passages, and the various minimal collages of industrial sounds makes for a great experience and a heavily artistic project. While the first two tracks were not that captivating, the rest of the album is stellar, with even a few post-rock passages thrown into the mix, one of the most creative and abstract projects I can recommend from 2023. At number 13 is Church of the Poisoned Minds by Anna Funk Damage. This is one of those cases where I discovered an album out of nowhere, and I'm so glad I gave this a shot, because wow, this album is impressive, and I've never seen anyone talk about it. This Italian producer made such a gnarly and raw industrial EBM post-punk release, with some of the coolest electronic sounds I've heard all year. Intense, dark and aggressive, the closest I can think of in terms of similarity is the Soft Moon, especially with the more recent stuff, but with a more dance approach on this one. Impressive short album that in just 31 minutes is filled with energy, one of my strongest recommendations as an underdog of 2023. At number 12 is one of the most unique and special projects on the list, and that's the collaboration between Ben Frost and Francesco Fabris with the album Vakning. A nature recordings album that achieves the opposite of what you would expect from an album like this. Instead of being a relaxing and soothing experience, these recordings sound threatening and alarming, and that's because they capture the sounds of volcanic eruptions and the aftermath, some of them so close to the point where the audio peaks and shatters. It's refreshing to listen to recordings that showcase the more destructive side of nature. This is such a refreshing project with a fascinating concept behind it. At number 11, we have The Beggar by Swans. Another massive double album keeping up the post-rock magic of their new era. And this is some of the best stuff they've put out. This feels like a great continuation on what the trilogy, The Seer, To Be Kind and The Glowing Man managed to achieve. This album is heavy, it feels soul-crushing, and it's another gorgeous work with great ideas, nicely performed and well produced. Very ambitious, kinda challenging, and requires your attention to grasp all that it throws at you, but once again, it's totally worth it. And now getting into the top 10. At number 10 is going to be Love is an Excessive Thing by NCOD Dharma. I constantly tell myself that there's no way they'll keep making such quality releases, and then they do this. Easily one of the best albums they've put out. Intense, powerful and disturbing noise release with pit crusher effects, absolutely punishing high frequencies, and an album that achieves so much and goes to so many phases of noise music in such a short period of time. NCOD Dharma still manages to amaze me with another ruthless release, managing to be one of my favorite harsh noise and power electronics albums of the year. At number 9 is Doran Electra with Fanfare. Definitely one of my most anticipated albums of 2023, since I loved their previous work, My Agenda, which has already become one of my favorite albums of the decade. Fanfare has a lot of a more emphasis on rock and metal directions and a different stylistic approach, with some parade circus goofiness which I was fine with. You can still consider it a hyperpop album though at the end of the day, and it's an intense one at that. While it doesn't reach the highs of My Agenda, which is really hard anyways, singles like Freak Mode and Puppet are some of the most addictive songs I've heard all year, while deep cuts like Man-Made Cuts and Touch Crash show a consistent quality tone. Powerful, silly, chaotic and aggressive, they slayed once again with this one. Number 8. This was obvious. It's Carrying the Hose by JPEG Mafia and Danny Brown. This is a match made in heaven, though I had my concerns getting into it, because I personally haven't been that much into the newer JPEG material. Also, I was worried that Danny Brown would mostly be like a feature and not have that much of a role in the album. That's what seemed to be the case when Lean Beef Patty dropped. Thankfully, this is the most creative and most imaginative JPEG Mafia album to date, and Danny Brown's unique delivery fits amazingly these songs. Some of the sampling and experimental hip-hop elements are just genius and mind-blowing, and to think that this was made with old equipment, you would expect hindrances and restrictions, but no, this album is filled with creativity and it deservingly takes the spot of the greatest hip-hop release of this year. With another match made in heaven at number 7 is Genocide, Organ and Bruant with the album Carte Blanche. Surprised this hasn't happened sooner, but in general it's about what you would expect. Both legends in death industrial and power electronics managed to make an extraordinary, dark, ominous and raw album that goes into many different phases of noise and industrial music, showcasing their capabilities by containing approaches that has made their works iconic over the years. And this is, in my opinion, for both artists, some of the greatest stuff they've put out to date. Not because they did something unique, but because they did some of their most imaginative stuff with a formula they're known for, which is kinda impressive, a menacing powerhouse of an album from start to finish. At number 6 we have When No Bird Sang, the collaboration between Full of Hell and Nothing. Full of Hell were on a roll in 2023, making 3 collaborative albums the same year, although the first ones with Primitive Man and Gasp ended up being disappointing and feeling rushed in my opinion. Due to this, I was worried that this was also going to be the case with the Nothing collab, and that would be disappointing because the collaboration between those two feels really promising. Fortunately, not only does it deliver, it's actually some of the best things both bands have put out, from unleashing furious sludge metal at the beginning to then leading to the more shoegaze parts. This collab blends both worlds in an astonishing 33-minute album filled with great compositions, crispy production, and as both heavy and soothing parts sound really cohesive. Very impressed by how good this ended up being. At number 5 is Destroy Chemical Weapons by Vatican Shadow. What an incredible year for Dominic Ferno releases, and this might actually be my favorite album of his as Vatican Shadow, only containing 3 tracks that go into minimal and repetitive approaches of ambient techno, a sound that aesthetically is kinda close to something that you would hear out of Muslim Cause, and it's done with such a cool dark atmosphere in which you can just get lost to. Outstanding use of minimal percussion and beats with a couple of analog synths, and such a hypnotic but also ominous and anxious experience. Undoubtedly one of the top Vatican Shadow releases. At number 4 is Black Color's Weltenbrand. The German industrial and techno producer has made some really decent stuff that got me looking forward to this, although I was not expecting something this astonishing. Not only did this exceed my expectations, but this is certainly one of my favorite dark electronic releases of the past couple of years. A throwback to old school industrial and EBM with tight production, great use of analog synth sounds, and just simplistic ideas that can instantly grab your attention and become memorable. Alongside with dark ambient moments and minimal punchy beats, this album manages to capture the essence of old school dark industrial techno music the way very few projects actually achieve on doing so. This is Black Color's magnum opus. Number 3 is Saved by Reverend Christine Michael Hayter. This is a solo project of Christine Hayter, mostly known for her project as Lingua Ignota. It is surprising for me to say that her Christian hymns and Southern Gospel album is the best thing I've heard from her so far. Keeping some of the more experimental outputs of her Lingua Ignota projects, the lo-fi production, the multiple layers of gorgeous vocal performances and the tape manipulations, alongside with other unexpected surprises, achieve on creating what is possibly the most unsettling album I've heard in 2023. The abruptness, the transitions between tracks, the depressive lyricism of a person lingering for salvation make for undoubtedly one of the most gut-wrenching experiences of the year, and a take on religious music done in such a unique and astonishing way. At number 2 is Optical Delusion by Orbital. This was to be expected, since I've loved basically anything the duo has put out. In many cases we've heard Orbital do stuff like this. It's a pretty similar sound, though there are a couple of exceptions to the second half. The thing is though, even if we've heard this sound from Orbital before, it's still engaging and they still make incredible imaginative electronic songs. Like Dirty Rat with Slave Mods might be one of my favorite songs they've done, and that says a lot. Another great example of an album for me where Orbital showcase why they are the kings of techno and breakbeat music, even after more than 3 decades of making music. And finally at number 1, my favorite album of 2023 is none other than Sem Limites by DJ Ramemes. I know, this result even surprises me. If you would tell me a few years ago that I would enjoy a Brazilian funk album this much, I don't think I would believe you. But there's something weirdly special about how wacky, energetic and off the rails this release becomes, because as you can guess, this is not your average Latin pop or reggaeton release. This one goes to a subgenre known as funk 150 BPM. Yes, apparently this is a thing. So, out of this thing, expect intense and furious Latin style beats, a constant assault of rapid vocal sample loops, and in general, a combination of sounds that is just really out there, and I hope we'll see more artists experiment with these directions. So I suggest you to get into this with an open mind, even if it doesn't sound like your thing. I mean, it's also a pretty short album, it's no longer than 30 minutes, so give it a chance. My main criticism out of the project is that all of the songs, and I mean all of them, loop twice. Basically all of the songs end halfway through and then they loop their entirety once again without adding anything new. This makes the pacing kinda weak and predictable, but when we're talking about such addictive ideas like this, it's not really a big deal. At least for me it wasn't. This album was really refreshing for me. I didn't know that this was what I needed to hear in 2023, but I'm glad I gave this a chance because this was such a pleasant surprise and an astonishing experience. And that's gonna be with my 50 favorite albums of 2023. What were your favorite albums out of the year? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.